Hello everyone, welcome back to the Unofficial Zoo. My name is Zach, and today I want to talk about setting up your first Caridina shrimp tank. I think this is such an exciting topic because it's always, so much fun to see new people get into the hobby and start their first shrimp tanks. But I think it can be really hard, especially for Caridina shrimp, just because their requirements can be so particular and they can be a very fragile shrimp to keep. That said, if you start watching other YouTube videos or reading forums or join a Facebook group about shrimp, you'll start to see over time that there is a formula for how to keep these shrimp successfully and how to get them breeding and a colony established. So my goal in this video is to try to help simplify some of these pieces and give you the formula for how to have a successful Caridina shrimp colony. Really because I want to see more people have success with the hobby. I think it's so much fun, and with Caridina especially, there are so many different varieties, so many patterns and colors, and there's more and more happening every day. So I just think it's a really cool hobby to be in, and I want to try to share that with as many people as possible and try to make sure that everyone is successful with keeping these shrimp that really can be hard to keep if you don't know exactly what they like. So with that said, I'm going to be going over a few different components of the shrimp tank to give you the formula for how to set this up yourself, but I won't be going into too much detail about each component. That is because each of these pieces that I will talk about could have their own video entirely. There is so much science and just background to give you about, even like the substrate to use, even the water that you're using to fill your aquarium, that if I were to try to include all the details that I really want to include, this video would be hours and hours long. So what I promise to do is I promise that I will go through and make individual videos really diving into the details about each of these components. But the purpose of this video is just trying to give everyone a very quick and easy way into starting their first Caridina shrimp tank. So with that said, let's get started. Now, the first thing that I want to touch on is actually picking out the size of your aquarium and the aquarium itself. So when it comes to fish keeping in general, you want to, as much as possible, get the biggest tank that you can afford. And afford might be in terms of space of where it'll fit, it might be in terms of cost, but you want to get as large a tank as possible. And the reason for this is that larger aquariums are going to be more stable. What that means is if you have a 20-gallon aquarium and the temperature of the room fluctuates a bit, it's going to take a lot more time and energy to adjust the temperature of that 20-gallon aquarium, or for that temperature to fluctuate with the room, than it would for, say, a 10-gallon tank. Simply because there's much more water, it takes a lot more energy to adjust the temperature. The same is true if you were to, say, accidentally overfeed a 10-gallon tank. Maybe if you're feeding something like these granules, if you accidentally dropped a few granules into a 10-gallon tank, you would have a much higher chance of polluting the tank than you would if you were to drop the same few extra granules into a 20-gallon tank. And that's purely because with more water volume, you dilute out any sort of waste or chemicals or pollutants much faster and much better, just because you have more water. So when it comes to shrimp keeping, and especially Caridina, the minimum I recommend for a beginner is going to be a 20-gallon long tank. When you're picking out a tank, you generally want to go for a tank that has a larger footprint rather than is deeper, because shrimp don't really use the depth, but they will use all of the surface area available in the tank. So a 20-gallon long tank is a great tank because 20 gallons is a good amount of water and will kind of keep your shrimp safe and stable, which Caridina really do need stable water parameters. And additionally, if it's like the Petco $1 per gallon sale, which it is actually right now if you have a Petco near you, you can pick up a 20-gallon long tank for just $20. So it's a super affordable option, and a lot of people have had success getting their shrimp started in 20-gallon long tanks and having colonies. I actually have 3 20-gallon long tanks over that direction that I have some shrimp colonies, and I have a pure red line colony in there, and I have a Bloody Mary colony in there, and each colony is a few hundred shrimp, and it's doing really, really well. So I would absolutely recommend the 20-gallon. If you don't have the space or you don't want to set up a tank that size, the absolute minimum I would recommend is a 10-gallon tank, just because when you start playing with 7 or 5 or 2.5 gallons, it can be really hard to maintain any sort of stability in temperature and water parameters. So really don't go below 10, but if you can, start with a 20-gallon long. It's going to be a great tank. Now, let's talk about the actual, before we get into like the substrate and the lighting and the plants, let's talk about the water you're using. With many fish, especially in freshwater, you can just use water straight out of the tap. You dechlorinate it, maybe with something like Prime, and you're good to go. With Caridina shrimp, this is not the case. If you've kept Neo-Caridina shrimp, like cherry shrimp or blue dream shrimp, or some of those other freshwater shrimp, they are more tolerant of tap water, but Caridina are not going to be that way. The reason is that Caridina come from very clean, pure bodies of fresh water that experience a lot of rainfall. So, they require very soft water that is fairly acidic and also has low alkalinity. And for the majority of people in the United States, this is not going to be the case with your tap water. Your water is going to be too hard, or it's going to have too many carbonates, or the pH is going to be too high. So if you really want to have success with keeping Caridina shrimp, you're going to need a source of purified water. Now this looks like distillation, but it could also be reverse osmosis or deionization. Now, this is where a lot of people get hung up because serious shrimp keepers will go out and buy a water purification system, but these often cost several $100s. If you're looking at getting a nice reverse osmosis deionization multi-stage system, you are looking at spending at least like $200 for a decent one, up to $400 or $500. And the other thing about reverse osmosis systems is they only produce a certain amount of water over time. So a lot of systems that are, especially budget systems, will only produce 50 or 75 or maybe 100 gallons of water per day, which is pretty slow and hard to manage. So for first-time shrimp keepers, this is a major roadblock. Now, there are a couple options. I'm not going to lie, they're not the most convenient and easiest options, but really keeping these shrimp is so rewarding that I would absolutely recommend at least trying it once. And while these options may be a little bit more difficult in the short term, in the long term, once you get into it, it will absolutely be worth it to buy a water purification system. So don't look at this as a long-term thing if you really think you're going to get into shrimp. But a couple sources of purified water. So one is some pet stores and some groceries will allow you to bring in a container and have a machine that dispenses distilled or otherwise purified water. There's something called TDS, Total Dissolved Solids, and I'm just going to skim the surface because I could go on for hours about this. But Total Dissolved Solids, essentially, it's a measure of how many minerals and chemicals are dissolved within the water. When you're starting out with purified water, you want to get that TDS to as close to 0 as possible. Generally, between 0 and 5 is going to be acceptable. So you can go to a grocery store, you can go to a pet store, and you can fill up jugs of this water. I'd probably recommend, if you're starting with a 20-gallon tank, getting like 6 5-gallon jugs of water. That way you have 4 jugs to initially fill up the tank and make the water, and then you have 2 extra jugs for water changes, and then maybe you go and fill up 2 jugs or all 6 jugs every month or 2 months or 3 months, depending on how many water changes you're doing and how long that water lasts you. But that is the first option. It's probably the easiest option to get started. The other option that I have come up with and that I've actually used because I lived on a dorm at one point and I had no access to my water filtration was there is a Brita water pitcher company competitor called Zerowater. Now, essentially a Brita water filter has like a carbon block filter. So you pour the water on the top, it filters down through this carbon, and it comes out somewhat kind of purified at the bottom. But a Brita water filter is not going to be adequate for shrimp. However, there's a company called Zerowater, and the technology they use in their filter is actually deionization. So deionization is going to pull out all of the chemicals, pull out all of the minerals in your water, and bring your TDS to 0. So a Zerowater pitcher, if you pour water on the top and take the TDS of the water that comes out at the bottom of the filter, it will have a TDS of 0 or very close to 0. It is a little bit slow, but I have, again, filled and run a 20-gallon aquarium on just a Zerowater pitcher. That said, a Zerowater pitcher I think is like $20-$25. You can pay up for a larger one, which you might want to do if you're going to have a large shrimp tank. But it is an easy way to get started that doesn't cost a lot of money and does not require you to lug large jugs of water from your local pet store or local grocery store. You do have to change the water filter every so often. But again, if you're just starting out, I think it's a great option, and it's something I've personally used as a lower cost alternative that didn't require a lot of initial investment. Now, once you have the purified water, you need to remineralize it. If you try to put shrimp or really any fish or aquatic animal in pure water. It's not going to work simply because it affects the process of osmosis, and I'm not going to go too far into it, but pure water is not safe for fish or especially shrimp. So you're going to need to remineralize it. There are a lot of products on the market from Seachem and other brands. I'm going to tell you that there is this salty shrimp B mineral GH+, and this is going to work every time when you're keeping Caridina. I'm not going to go too far into it just because this is a product that works. This is a product that a lot of breeders around the world use. I believe it's German, but it really, really works. So if you want to have success and you don't want to worry about remineralizing your water, you should absolutely get this. It is a little bit pricey for some, but it's 1000% worth the cost because it's going to work. And there are instructions on the actual packaging, and you can find instructions online for how to use it, but I would absolutely recommend that product for remineralizing your water. Now, let's move along because I see that this video is already exceeding 10 minutes, at least in my recording time. Moving right along, let's talk about the substrate. So, when you are picking substrate for a Caridina aquarium, it's a little bit different than picking substrate for another type of freshwater fish or shrimp aquarium. The reason for this is Caridina, as I mentioned earlier, require very soft, acidic water. So in terms of your parameters, the three that you really want to be monitoring are your pH, your GH, and your KH. Now your pH is a measure of acidity of the water. The GH is general hardness, which essentially really helps with the molting of the shrimp. And then you have carbonate hardness, which Caridina don't really need. So with your water parameters, you want your pH to be, I keep personally my shrimp around 5.3, 5.5, but you want to maintain somewhere between that 5.3 and maybe 6.8, depending on the Caridina and depending on where they're coming from. Now, the best case scenario for you to do is to set up your tank, measure your water parameters, and then find a breeder who's keeping shrimp in similar water parameters, because if they are keeping them successfully in, whatever pH and GH and KH, and they're breeding and you have similar water, you're probably going to have success if you put shrimp into your tank. So that's probably the biggest piece of advice. Find a breeder who is keeping shrimp in similar water parameters. But when it comes to maintaining these water parameters in your tank, substrate will help a lot. So there are a variety of substrates made specifically for keeping Caridina shrimp. I personally use something called fluval shrimp stratum because it works for me, but some people don't think it has quite enough buffering capacity. There are a few other options. There's 88 Amazonia aqua soil, which is a very popular one. It's been very popular for many years, at least in the shrimp industry. So that's another option. And there is also a newer one called Brightwell, which is a newer company with a lot of shrimp products. And I've heard good things about their substrate for Caridina. I just haven't personally used it. Now, the thing about these substrates is they buffer your water for you. So when you place in your fresh remineralized water, it's going to help you maintain your very soft, low GH of a range of 4 to 6. It's going to help you maintain your KH between 0 and 2, and it's going to help you keep your pH lower than 7, so in that 5.3 to 6.8 range. Your pH will adjust a little bit depending on which exact substrate you use and how many times you do water changes, or like the frequency of your water changes. But you absolutely need to get a buffering active substrate if you want to have success keeping Caridina. Now, I'm not going to say that you can't have success without a buffered substrate, and I'm not, when it comes to the remineralizer, you can have success with using a different remineralization solution. And there are some people who have success with tap water. I'm just telling you, I know that this is going to work. And if you want the best chance of having success with these shrimp, these are the tools to use. These are the products to use, because you will have success. Once you become a little bit more experienced, you have more shrimp tanks, you have more experience with breeding shrimp, and you kind of know what to look for, you can start experimenting with other products and other things. But if you are just getting started and you just want to have success and have a good time right out of the gate, these are the products I recommend. Now, we've covered substrate. The next thing I want to talk about that is really important is filtration. Now, when it comes to aquariums in general and freshwater aquariums, there are a lot of options out there for filters. There's canister filters, hang on the back filters, internal sponge filters, all sorts of things. What is most commonly used in shrimp tanks is air-powered sponge filters. You can get these super cheap I think I bought mine in like a 6-pack and they were $5 or $6 a piece. Some pet stores will have them for $10 or $12, but you can really get them affordably. Essentially, you just hook them up to an air pump and air pulls water in through the sponge and pushes it out through the top of the filter. Again, super cheap, super affordable, very easy to maintain. You don't have to do a whole lot. And the shrimp love them. And part of why they love them is there is a lot of surface area of the sponge exposed directly to the shrimp. So it's a great spot for babies. And it's a great spot for biofilm to grow where, babies and adults can feed. So absolutely recommend a sponge filter. Another problem with other types of filtration like canister filters or hang on the back filters is that shrimp, and especially baby shrimp, can get sucked up into the filter and get destroyed by the impeller or various components. So sponge filters are quick, easy, safe, and they really work. And they're cheap. So absolutely recommend getting an air-driven sponge filter. There are a couple different options out there. I use pretty basic ones. Some other shrimp breeders will use a Matten filter, which I'm not going to spend time explaining that. I will in a different video, but you can go look that up. But just some sort of air-driven sponge filter is going to provide success for you. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is plants. Plants are quite important when keeping a Caridina shrimp tank for a couple reasons. One is that plants will naturally help maintain stable water and reduce your bio load by consuming some of the waste that your shrimp and maybe snails or other animals produce, which is great for maintaining very clean, pure water. Another thing is that there are great spaces for shrimp to hide and forage and for biofilm to grow. So for most of the successful breeding colonies that you will see have some sort of plant in them. Now, you really don't have to go too intense with the plants or pick difficult plants. There are a lot of super easy plants that grow in low tech setups that really work well for shrimp. Now, there are a variety of mosses. The most popular and the easiest to care for probably being Java moss, which I use extensively in my shrimp tanks. There's another there's another plant called Substrate that is similar to moss. They both grow in very low light. They're both very easy to maintain. They grow quickly. They absorb a lot of the excess nitrogen and nutrients in the water. So Java moss, Substrate, both great options. I also have crystal wort. I find it doesn't do as well in tanks that don't have a high quantity of shrimp. So I'm talking like hundreds of shrimp in a 20-gallon aquarium. But in those tanks that do have a lot of shrimp, it works really well. So that's crystal wort. There are a few other products. There's some types of ferns like Java fern that can do well. There's Anubias nana and Anubias nana petite, which are a small underwater plant that again do well in a variety of tanks and especially low light. There's also guppy grass. There's so many different plant products, but Java moss, Substrate, probably Anubias are the most common that you'll see in shrimp tanks and that you will have success with. It is just important to have that space for them to forage and hide in the tank, as well as to get that benefit of reducing the bioload of the tank and helping filter some of the nitrogen and excess nutrients that will build up in the tank over time if you don't have plants. Now, moving along, let's talk about lighting. We really don't need to spend a lot of time here. On my tanks, just have cheap LED lights that I found on Amazon by a company called Night Crew. I find that for my 20-gallon long tanks, they may be a little bit overpowered because I'm having a lot of problems with algae, but for my 40 breeders and my 75s, they work really well. You don't have to do a lot for lighting, especially if you are keeping basic mosses and basic plants that don't require a ton of light, but you should have some sort of light. You should also try to keep a consistent daylight schedule, as again, consistency is key with keeping these shrimp. I personally have my lights on timers. They're on 8 hours a day, off 16 hours a day to try to control my algae problems. But lighting isn't too difficult of a thing, but something that you need to have for a successful planted shrimp tank. I also want to talk about food while we're here. Now, there are so many different shrimp food options, and there are a lot of really nice, expensive foods by like Shrimp King and a variety of German brands and Taiwanese brands. I'm going to quickly give you two products that I have built my crystal red shrimp, my pure red line crystal red shrimp colony off of. And that is, first of all, fluval shrimp granules. These are very underrated. I haven't seen a lot of people talk about these. I use them all the time. This little thing is, I think, $3 or $4 on Amazon. Some of the German brands or Japanese brands are going to cost you like $20 for this much food. It's a great little size that shrimp can pick up and run away with, easy to eat. It's high protein. High protein diets are going to encourage your female shrimp to breed and have successful egg hatching, that sort of thing. So it's a super affordable option. You can get it on Amazon with Prime shipping. So fluval shrimp granules, 100% recommend for if you're just starting out and you don't want to go drop a bunch of money on trying a bunch of different shrimp foods, but you want something that's going to work for breeding your shrimp and starting your colony. Once you get more into shrimp, you can go experiment with more foods. I have a variety of foods that I play with, but this is going to work. The other thing that you really need if you are wanting to have success with keeping baby shrimp is BacterAE. Sorry, it's a little bit glary. This is made by GlasGarten, which is a German company. I think this was $25 or $30 for this little thing. It does go a long way, but it really is something that you need to have if you want to have success with keeping your newly hatched baby shrimp alive and surviving. Essentially what the product does is it promotes the growth of biofilm in your shrimp tank, which is essential for especially baby shrimp to be able to survive. I have tried to not use BacterAE, and really it's not worth it to try to like hatch babies and have success rearing them, just because they don't survive as well, like nearly as well. When this product came out, I think it was like 10 or 12 years ago, it really changed the kind of aspect of being able to keep these baby shrimp and really help people breed their shrimp more effectively and keep the babies alive. So again, this is a product that might be a little bit expensive, 100% worth the money, especially for keeping more expensive Caridina shrimp. I've tried to go without it, but just get it. Trust me, you won't regret it. 100%, I promise. The last piece of the shrimp tank, we are there, that I want to talk about and that I think that you should incorporate into your tank is some sort of botanical decoration. The reason this is important is, well, there's a couple reasons. Good botanicals. So when we're talking about botanicals, I'm talking about, well, I have some, this is some Malaysian driftwood. I've got some mapani wood here. There's some spiderwood over there. I also have things like, this is an Indian almond leaf. Now, before we talk about the actual botanicals, the importance of having a botanical or a group of or a set of botanicals in your tank is that it helps mimic the shrimp's natural environment, so they will be more comfortable. It also increases the surface area, again, for biofilm to grow and algae to grow. And then I want to talk specifically about Indian almond leaves, which are these, because I've actually pulled the like mapani wood and driftwood out of most of my aquariums. And I have switched exclusively almost to Indian almond leaves. Now I pulled the wood out of my tanks just because it was making it harder for me to net shrimp out effectively and quickly. But I switched out with Indian almond leaves, and these are great for a variety of reasons. So one, you can see that they have a lot of surface area. This is actually a very small Indian almond leaf. They can get much, much larger than this. And they're great when they're that much larger. Now there are a couple benefits. One, surface area for biofilm. Two, the leaf is actually large enough that it eventually sinks and sits on the, sorry, I just got a text. It eventually sinks and sits on the bottom of your aquarium and provides shelter for your shrimp is one thing. And the last piece is that over time, these Indian almond leaves will actually decompose in the tank and the shrimp can eat them as a natural food source. This is something like decaying leaf matter and plant matter, something that shrimp naturally eat in the wild. So especially if you're going away for a while, maybe you're going on vacation for a week or two, if you drop a couple of these leaves in maybe a month before you leave, they will be a natural food source for your shrimp. So you know that your colony is going to survive because they have something to eat. Alternatively, it can just be a great option to keep in your tank because it's a great place for shrimp to just naturally graze and eat and get a variety of foods. So 100% recommend Indian almond leaves. They shouldn't be too expensive. Maybe if you're buying a 10 pack at most, you're looking at like $1, $1.20 per leaf, but absolutely worth it. And they do last generally a couple months before they are eaten or go bad. Now, I think that sums up most of my recommendations for a shrimp tank. I have a couple other notes here. One is on temperature. So optimal temperature for keeping shrimp, in my experience, has been somewhere between 72 and 74 degrees. If you increase the temperature too much, you will have, your shrimp will grow much faster, which can be a good thing. However, if they grow too fast, their lifespan will be shortened significantly. So you don't want to do that. And if you keep them colder, some people will keep the shrimp as high as 78 degrees or as low as 68 degrees. And if you keep them colder than 72, I've noticed that growth slows down significantly, and notably, breeding slows down significantly. Now, I do want to do a video specifically about temperature for invertebrates and breeding, because I have seen this across different species and across both freshwater and marine, but I just want to state that temperature is important. You generally don't really need to use a heater. Room temperature will often work. I do sometimes use a heater if I want to speed up growth, but I always use a heater that is underpowered for the aquarium. So like in this 75, I have a 40 watt or a 50 watt heater. In these 40s, I have a 50 watt heater. I keep it underpowered because in the event that the heater were to fail or the thermostat were to fail and the heater were to stay on perpetually, it wouldn't boil my tank and boil my shrimp. And again, room temperature is generally fine, in that it doesn't get too cold. It's just it's nice to bring in some heat every so often to speed things up. Like if you have a lot of juvenile shrimp that you just got in and you want them to breed ASAP, you can heat up the tank for a few weeks to get them to grow faster and have their first mating sessions faster. And I think actually that's it. So let me know if you have any questions, or if you think that some part of my formula was wrong, or you have other tips to give people. I'm always open to more information. I'm always trying to learn more myself and provide better and more accurate information to everyone. But really, I just want to see more people have success in this hobby. And I'm sorry that this was a long video. I tried to make it shorter. I filmed this video like 5 or 6 times trying to make it shorter, but I think that this is the minimum amount of time that I could spend while still making sure that you got all of the necessary information to really get started with your shrimp tank. I absolutely recommend that you go check out some other YouTube channels or check out some blog posts. I recommend, if you have Facebook, you should go join some shrimp groups on Facebook. I'm part of several. I've moderated a few groups over time. But they are great resources, and you're constantly just having posts about shrimp and people's tanks and issues with their shrimp, things like that in your newsfeed so you're just learning all the time. Same with Instagram. You can follow me on Instagram at @unofficialzoo, but you can also find other people with their shrimp tanks and see what they're doing and see how they're having success. But really, when it comes to shrimp, it's going to be a learning process, and I've been in this hobby for almost 10 years, keeping and breeding shrimp, and I have learned something almost every day that I've been working with my shrimp, just because not only are we as a community constantly learning things and coming up with new patterns, but we're just, as more people join the hobby, we're just trying new things and experimenting, and I think it's so cool and so much fun that we get to keep continuously learning. So absolutely, don't stop here, keep learning, but I wanted to try to make a video that kind of summarized and condensed all of this information as a one-stop shop for you to say, okay, here's my checklist of things that I need. I need to think about my tank. I need to think about how I'm producing water and putting water in my tank. I need to think about my substrate, make sure I have an active substrate that has a good reviews. I need to think about my filter and make sure I have a good sponge filter that's not going to suck up babies and is going to be shrimp safe. I need to think about plants and what's an easy plant that I can throw in that won't really need fertilizers, but that my shrimp will appreciate. I need just a quick light, and then you need to get some food for your shrimp to grow successfully. So thank you so much for watching. Drop this video a like if it helped you set up your first shrimp tank. Feel free to actually message me or drop a comment if you are setting up a shrimp tank. I would love to see some of your tanks, or if you have a video of your tank, I would love to see your tank videos. So drop that down below. Thank you guys so much for watching. Subscribe if you want to see more from me and want me to dive deeper into some of these topics. And I will see you guys later. All right, bye.